Darling one, you were born from the sweetest love, cast from the fires of creation, burning bright into the making of your perfect constellations. Head high, my love, never let them diminish you. Stand tall in the power of your love. Break open to the thousands come before you, written in your heart with holy blood. Keep going, my love. Hold tight to the scripture of your inheritance, your dreams born from ancient stone. Weave your magic star of wisdom, breathing life into hollow bones. Courage, my love. Place pain upon your sacred altars. Grow seeds where life has become hopeless. Lend hands to those who fall and falter. Let love be life's greatest opus. Welcome, beautiful souls. My name is Tara Brading, and I'm the creator of the Dreaming the Ancestors podcast series, where we talk about remembering and reclaiming ancestral stories, feminine wisdom, and earth magic. And today I'm so excited to welcome Jen Murphy, who is the creatress of the Celtic School of Embodiment. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Jen on now. So Jen, you can say hello to everyone.
I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's such an honor. So thank you, Tara, for having me.
So lovely to be here with you. Have such a heart connection with you already, as we do such similar work in the world, of course, in our own unique expressions of that work, but there's so much beautiful overlap there. And so I think this conversation is going to be so potent. And I would love to read out Jen's bio for everyone so you can get a better sense of the work that she does. Jen Murphy is a feminine embodiment coach, mythologist, and anthropologist. She is the creator of Celtic Embodiment, a cutting-edge modality that fuses the ancient wisdom of Celtic mythology with the emerging fields of feminine embodiment coaching to transform modern life for women. Jen is a certified feminine embodiment coach and holds a degree in medieval Irish and Celtic studies and a master's in anthropology and development. Jen's philosophy is, let your body and mythology guide you home to you. It is such an honor to have Jen here with us. And as always, I would love to open our sacred space today by inviting in the ancestors and imagining that we are having this conversation in the flesh, heart to heart. And I invite us all to close our eyes in this moment and just take a few deep breaths, inviting our bodies fully into this circle. And I invite us to imagine that we are sitting together around a great fire. And we're sharing wisdom, we're sharing stories, as our ancestors have done since time immemorial. And I invite us all to really hold the vision of this circle around the fire, hearing that gentle crackling of the firewood, the smell of smoke in the air, and feel the gathering of this sister circle. And also here with us are our ancestors. And I would love to consciously and intentionally invite the ancestors to stand tall around us as we embark on this conversation together, this journey together. So I would like to take a moment to call in my wise and well ancestors. And what's feeling really alive for me in this moment is the fact that my body is the physical manifestation of the lineage. My body is the ancestor altar, just as your body is the ancestor altar. I'm also deeply feeling the presence of really strong amazing women in my lineage who dared to be different. And I know that for many women in generations before me, the choice to be different was quite a significant choice. And so I honor these women, my ancestors, these women who lived by the rhythms of their own body, who followed that inner knowing, that inner wisdom. Honoring all of my ancestors in this moment and calling the wise and well ancestors to stand around us. These beautiful women included that I've just spoken to and honored. I also want to honor the lands that I stand upon, the ancestral lands of the Ute and Arapaho people, where I live in the mountains of Colorado. And I really honor my place here. And I humbly ask to continue my journey of learning, of belonging, and coming into deeper connection with these lands. Blessed, blessed be Milawiches. And with that, I pass over to you, lovely Jen.
Thank you. So Gleam wid isteach inov an vagin vara no an selkie an air. So let's call in the energy of the sea maiden or the selkie from the east. Vrid Bandia and Naas, so the goddess Bridget from the south. An van Leach Maeve, the warrior woman Maeve. An so from the west, an Cailleach a Dua, the Cailleach from the north, agus Aideen il Cruach I Creelar na Tíre seo. So shape-shifting Aideen in the heart of this land. Agus tugam wid olmus do go ar sinseir agus na Sean Kocha a hána grown. So just honoring the voices of our ancestors and the storytellers who have come before.
Thank you so much, Jen. So the title of this episode today is Reclaiming the Mythos of Our Feminine Bodies, which is something that is very near and dear to me as it speaks to so much of my own journey of feminine empowerment and healing and belonging, as well as my journey with ancestral stories and Irish mythology. And I can just feel that Jen and I are going to have such a powerful conversation about these interweaving aspects of this multi-layered topic. As women, I deeply feel that so many of us have been indoctrinated into so many false narratives about our bodies from a very, very young age. Stories that can take us away from the true essence of who we are and our embodied wisdom. But we are living in really powerful times where we can rewrite these stories and reclaim the power of living embodiment. Tales of the mythic feminine and her archetypal energies can help guide us back to buried and forgotten aspects of ourselves, breathing life into a felt sense of sacredness and sovereignty that sings in our bones. And I really believe that our bodies hold so many incredible stories that flow down to us from our lineages, from our wisdom traditions. And it's the body where these stories are most alive and most vibrant. And there have been so many times when I have felt the ancient myths singing in my blood and bones, awakening me to powerful truths and sacred remembrances, especially when it comes to the mythic feminine and her many, many faces. And as some of you or lots of you might know who are listening, I am really devoted to the Irish traditions and the Irish goddesses specifically, who are written down in these very, very ancient myths. And yet, these ancestral stories, which were first written down by Christian monks in medieval times, don't really give us a full picture of who these goddesses really were and really are. The original myths, the source material, is often layered with historical and patriarchal overtones. And so many of the ancient myths are written from the male hero perspective, and the agendas and the values of the church are very present in these stories. And some of them are even highly discredited by academics. So as wonderful as it is that we have these ancient myths and stories in the Irish tradition to give us these little breadcrumbs to follow, it feels really important to have our own relationship with the mythology and to allow the archetypal energies of these stories to awaken us to our own embodied sense of meaning and truth. And to me, this is really what mythology is about. It's about discovering the stories of our ancestors in our own bodies, and as women to really allow for the mythic feminine to illuminate parts of us that are longing to be remembered and reclaimed. So Jen, I would love to pass over to you now and just begin by hearing a little bit about your personal journey and how you became interested in myth and ancestry and feminine embodiment.
Great. Thank you, Tara, for that beautiful and such a potent introduction to our conversation. And really, my story begins with my grandmother, Frances O'Sullivan. So she was born in inner city Dublin in Pimlico, and very proud of that. And, you know, for me, she really represents how to use story to bring people together. So Frances faced deep grief in her life because she lost her soulmate, my grandfather Christy, when he was only 36 from MS. And it was Christmas week, and her sister Noelle passed away the same week in childbirth, and the child with her. So just immense tragedy. And she was left with 7 children. But my mother told me that, you know, in order to keep the children together, what Frances used to do is she used to invite all the friends and neighbors in off the street and sit around the fireside and tell stories. And she did the same for me and my friends growing up. And she would love to just scare the bejesus out of you. So she loved kind of the darker tales of banshees and changeling fairies. But she really fueled my passion and interest in Irish folklore and mythology. And so much so that I went on then to do a degree in medieval Irish and Celtic studies. And I had an amazing lecturer, Myrnie Volcoin, and I took all of her courses around women in early Irish literature. And so the exposure of women in our mythology happened for me quite early, which was really incredible. But I went on actually to become an anthropologist. I worked in global justice and human rights for 14 years. But that actually gave me the opportunity to spend time with many remote communities across our world, and gave me access to myth cross-culturally and Indigenous traditions cross-culturally. And I went on then, you know, when I did my master's in anthropology and development, I specialized in critical pedagogy. And really that is about, you know, the power we hold as learners. And I was really inspired by Paulo Freire, who spoke a lot to this. And one of his ideas is around the banking concept in education. So, for example, Tara, if say I'm the teacher and you're the student in this banking concept of education, I see you as an empty receptacle to be filled with or banked with my worldview so that you embody that and you regurgitate that back to me. And in that way, we're going to reproduce the same social order. And I'm taking your power away as a learner. And this is so fascinating when you look at this in Irish mythology. And you've spoken so well to this already. Who are the storytellers? And so, like the Christian monks, for example, were the ones who wrote down the lore. So who's the power holder here? Who's the educator? Because this affects how we perceive our Indigenous wisdom. So I had that kind of river running through my life around story and mythology. And the embodiment piece actually came quite late, and it came from being burnt out, really. I was working in an NGO, managing a large team, and my way of operating was to really lean into hyper masculinity, to be hyper productive. And I really prided myself, on this productivity, but I was burning out over and over again. And I eventually decided to become a Kundalini yoga teacher. And I trained as well around that time as a women's circle facilitator. And also decided on a complete intuitive impulse to become a feminine embodiment coach, which was just such an incredible decision. But around the time that all of this was happening, the embodiment, I started having dreams, particularly around Queen Maeve. And eventually these dreams lured me up to my attic, where I discovered that I had saved all of my notes from my degree in mythology. And I'm not a hoarder at all. I am actually ruthless. So I was surprised to just see like that I'd savored everything. So I just started to inhale these stories again. And it's kind of no surprise to me in a way that the more I was coming home to my own body, the more there was a desire to reroute in my mythology, in the indigenous wisdom, in the ancestors that live on in my body. And I felt like the myths were inviting me into a new relationship with them. Like, yes, the academic aspect really supported me, but it was more from a much deeper kind of embodied place. So, yeah, and I feel that this journey it's still unfolding for me very much in real time.
I resonate so much with so much of what you shared. And I share a similar thread with you in that I really sunk much deeper into this work after feeling very burned out. And I was actually working for a nonprofit as well when this happened. And yeah, I just felt like I was giving, just depleting myself over and over again. And ended up having sort of a minor health crisis around that burnout. And that's actually when I made the decision to go to Ireland for 2 months and really reconnect with this wisdom that I had been interested in for a long time and had been learning and embodying for some time. But I knew there was a deeper level that needed to happen with the activation of actually being on the land. So I actually went to Ireland and had this whole journey with Goddess Bridget. And some of you listening may have heard me talk about this story before, but it was just incredibly life-changing to really discover Bridget's wisdom within me and in collaboration with the land and the mythology. So just resonates so much with what you shared, Dan, and so many shared threads there. I would love to hear a little bit more about reflections on mythology and the body from a feminine perspective specifically.
Yeah. So I suppose, for me, it really, again, just to bring back that thread of it starting with the storytellers, so who are the ancestors? Who are telling us these stories? And as far back as we know, within the Irish tradition, you have the filla or the ban filler, so the poet or poetess. And these were members of the Aishdana, the people of the arts, who were the most highly revered people in early Irish society. The poets also held this gift called Imas Ferocni, which means knowledge that illuminates. So they were seers as well. And they were highly skilled in their craft. I mean, there are 7 grades of poet, and it would take up to about 20 years to do your full training. And this is all in oral tradition. So everything is held within the body. But then about the 5th century, we see Christianity arrive in Ireland and the opening of these monasteries. And, from, the kind of earliest times, these monasteries were actually rich centers of learning. They absorbed a lot of the Fili, so the poets went in, the Dree, the Druids, the Brehevs, who were the keepers of the indigenous law tracts. So they got absorbed into the monasteries. And what's really spectacular about early Irish literature is that they were writing in the vernacular. So they're writing in the indigenous language. They're writing in Shan Gaeilge in Old Irish. And this is against, the Latin tide. And they're also writing secular stories, right? Which is pretty outstanding. Now they are putting their own Christian motifs on these secular stories, as we know. But what we start to see happen over time then is, particularly around the 12th century, I think it's around 1142, the Cistercian monks arrive from France. And this sees the closure of the native monasteries and the end of writing secular stories. And from this point as well, you're starting to see a much greater denunciation of women in relation to the church. And then, over, the next 1,000 years or so, you have the decline of the Gaelic ruling class. You have the penal laws in Ireland, this kind of war between England and the Catholic Church. And amidst all of this, these head schools, these underground schools where people are learning from the Gaelic poets. And then if you continue on, around the 18th and 19th century, you have the Gaelic and Celtic revival. And that in a way, was a rejection of modernity and also of British imperialism. It was a desire to reclaim the language, the culture, the stories. But it also reflects the sensibilities of the time. So the likes of the storytellers there who are actually recording the mythology is the likes of Yeats and, Lady Gregory. And if you take an example here of, say, the exile of the sons of Ishlu, which many people will know as Deirdre of the Sorrows, of that story. So the earliest version we have of that is maybe 8th or 9th century. And, when that is first recorded by the Christian monks, just to give a brief summary of what that tale says. So in the tale, Deirdre in utero shrieks from her mother's womb at this feast of warriors. And the druid Catfa is there and he prophesies this child is going to bring, disaster and destruction and despair when she's born. So the warriors are like, yeah, kill her, right? But Conchobar MacNassa, who is the king, because it's prophesied also that she's going to be profoundly beautiful, says, no, let's let her live and I will take her as a wife. So she is protected then by a female poet, by a Banfilla, a satirist called Levercam, who raises her in the woods. And while, when she's in her teenage years, Deirdre has this vision when she sees a raven drinking blood in the snow. And this vision is of the colours of the man that she will meet. She turns out to be Nisha. And when Deirdre meets Nisha in this story, he rejects her. So she grabs him by the ears and she puts a get on him, like a taboo that binds him to her. But if you were to read Lady Gregory's version of this story 1,000 years later, I think she calls Deirdre a woman of the gentlest nature in all of Ireland. And there's one thing you cannot call Deirdre, it's gentle, So again, who is telling these stories and, what does that embody? And then just finally, I suppose you have Ireland gets our independence and you have church and state collusion in the education system. And our myths really get relegated to the realm then of children's stories. But I suppose, what has this got to do with the body and the feminine? And it's really important to notice how systems of oppression play out in our bodies. So we metabolize our learning systems through our bodies so that it influences, how we see our world and our role in it. So if I'm to look at, say, Lady Gregory's story of Deirdre, I'm thinking, don't go after your desires, be sweet and demure. Your hero is going to come along and he's going to save you. Whereas if I look at the earlier version, 1,000 years earlier, even though it's written by a Christian monk, it tells me, look, no matter what is prophesied about you, go after your desires, even if it ends in despair. And for me, that story is closer to the source. It likely originated in the oral tradition, So if we can go back through our mythology with this critical lens, like what new stories might we begin to tell ourselves about the feminine, about our power as women, and how can we embody those stories so that it influences how we interact with the world that we live in today?
Such a beautiful and in-depth answer, Jan, and just really receiving all that you shared. And I really love that you brought in the Philly, and that's something that actually we're learning about in my membership this month. So that felt really synchronistic, and the power of that oral tradition is just so incredibly moving to me. And it's something that I feel is wanting to be revived. That's just a sense that I have in my body. And this is something that I do a lot in my teachings. I orally transmit these stories to women in circle. And I've had a vision before of times long, long ago, in the time of the ancestors and the ancients, when we used to sit in the dark, whether it be in caves or in burial mounds, and we used to receive those stories orally and be asked to memorize them and repeat them back. And that back and forth in the dark is just such a powerful vision that I have and I hold in my heart. And, who knows if it really happened that way or not, but I can feel the power of these stories in our bodies, in our DNA, and those stories wanting to be reclaimed, especially as women. My next question for you, Jan, could you give an example of a myth goddess that has been impactful for you on your embodiment journey, and how these ancient stories can be relevant to us as modern women? So you already kind of spoke to this a little bit, but I wonder if there's a different story that you would like to share that's been impactful for you personally.
The goddess that really springs to mind for me is Maeve, because Maeve was my first experience of learning about misogyny. I think that was actually the first time I learned about misogyny when I took a course on Maeve in early Irish literature. Maeve is Queen of Connacht in the west of Ireland. And along with, probably Ireland's most well-known warrior, Cuchulainn, she is a protagonist in the great Irish epic Táin Bó Cúailnge, so the cattle raid of Cooley. And this ultimately is a war between Connacht in the west of Ireland and Ulster in the north of Ireland. And the war is caused in how the story is expressed by Maeve's desire. Okay, so Maeve is in this conflict with her husband Aliel around who is the wealthiest. So they do this inventory of all of their wealth, and it is equal, except Aliel has a bull called Finvanach. Now, this bull originally would have been Maeve's because it was born a calf with Maeve, but it decided that it didn't want to be led by a woman. So it moves over to Aliel's herd. And this bull is actually a man reincarnated as well, but that's a whole other story. So there's one other bull that's, Finvanach's equal in Ireland, and this is the brown bull of Cooley. So Maeve decides to go after the bull, first with diplomacy, and when that doesn't work, with force. And if you look at the story of Maeve through the lens of patriarchy, what you see is that, Maeve is shamed throughout the Táin. And, she the way she's presented sends a real violent message of censorship around this is the disastrous consequences of a woman who has too much power. And what's really interesting as well around the Táin is if you look at the earliest manuscript that we have a copy of it. It's Lara Nahidra, the Book of the Dung Cow. And parts of this have been, wholly erased and rewritten. So these stories are really malleable. And, what many scholars believe is Maeve was, in fact, a sovereignty goddess before she was this warrior queen. And in Irish mythology, the sovereignty goddess is the fine expression of, nature, of the feminine, of the wild, of the land. And, for Maeve, Maeve's name actually means she who intoxicates, and it's sort to relate to mead as well, which is, the oldest alcoholic drink. And the sovereignty goddess, why this is important is because when the sovereignty goddess decided who was worthy of ruling the land, because she made the decision around the king who was worthy, they were symbolically married in this ritual called the Banish Rigi, where the goddess would offer a wedding libation, a drink that intoxicates, as a sign of her approval. And if the king was an unjust ruler, the tua or the tribe would suffer the sovereignty goddess's wrath. So the crops would fail, the livestock, would die, the birth rate would plummet. And, the tua then, the tribe would dispose of the king as a result because he would have been an unjust ruler. But for Maeve, I like to explore her story around this shaming of women, and we've got like millennia of patriarchy impressing upon us this sense that we're not enough or we're too much. So, we go around feeling inadequate and we don't even know why. And Dr. Valerie Ryan calls this patriarchy stress disorder, that exists within our bodies. But there's a really fascinating climatic scene in the Táin where, they're at the height of battle and all of a sudden Maeve gets her gush of blood. She gets her bleed, right? Her period. And they're like, oh my God, like the ultimate shaming of a woman now. Look, we're at the start of a war and she's bleeding, right? So Maeve goes off to relieve herself, but she produces blood in such quantities that it digs 3 deep channels in the landscape, each enough to take a household. So in this way, again, she's the goddess, she's the sovereignty goddess, she's the land shaper. So even when, she's being shamed by the Christian monks, there's still so much power, so much awe, and reverence for Maeve there. And for me, like when we look at her story and the layers of shame that are placed upon us, if we can release that shame, that frozen tension back to flow, what kind of power is available to us as women? It's a way to be able to step into our power. There is one more, like if there's time, maybe one more mythical woman, that I could mention as well, and I want to mention her because she just seems to hold such a resonance with the women that I work with. And it's the mythical Selkie. So the shape-shifting seal woman. And many of your listeners are probably familiar with Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, or If Women Rose Rooted by Sharon Blackie, where the Selkie features in both of these incredible books. But in the Irish tradition, the tales centre as well around on Vagin Vara, the sea maiden. And the story usually goes that a lonely man, on the beach stumbled across a sea maiden's sealskin or her fishtail or her brat. A brat is a magical cloak in the Irish tradition, and he snatches it from her. So she has to stay in her human form, and then she's no choice but to go and live in this man's world. And she survives there for a while, but eventually she burns out. Her health deteriorates, her life force begins to leak drip by drip. And eventually, usually a child, one of her children, managed to find the seal skin and she's able to return to the sea. And when she does, she plumpens, she ripens, she begins to shine bright again with sea life. And for me, the seal skin is our feminine expression. That's what our sealskin represents to me, you know. Patriarchy means rule of the father. And, you know, for me, it's about masculine and feminine expressions that can exist within our bodies, no matter what gender or, you know, what binary or non-binary we hold. But we live in a world that values the masculine at the expense of the feminine. So we value mind over body, you know, people over nature, logic over intuition, you know, linear growth over cyclic wisdom. And so, you know, for me, the mythical Selkie is coming ashore to implore us to reskill and reclaim the feminine, you know, because in a way, to put it crudely, at the moment, you know, many of us are going around like half a soul because we're only embodying our masculine because that's what the world is demanding of us. So yeah, so that story as well, just, you know, it's a very different energy to Maeve, but very potent in reskilling in our feminine.
I love the different examples that you've given because they're so different. And what I find so amazing about these ancient myths about the ancient feminine is that they are widely varied. And just to continue with what you were saying, I feel in many times in my own life, at least, and I've heard many other women share similar feelings, that I have felt put in a box, that my feminine me belongs in this little box over here. And to go outside of that box is to rock the boat. And, you know, there's a taboo around it. There's this breaking of the walls that really shakes us to our core when we break out of that box. And for me, the mythic feminine shows us all these different aspects of ourselves. So you just talked about Maeve, you've talked about the Selkies, and before that, you were talking about Deirdre. Yeah, you were talking about Deirdre. So three very different expressions of the feminine. And when you look at Irish mythology, there's so many other expressions. And that's what I absolutely love is that these goddesses really speak to these aspects of ourselves that have become dissociated through patriarchal trauma. So it's just so with you on the same page there, Jan, and feeling such resonance with what you shared. And something that I would love to journey into now is you were speaking about ancestral embodiment as we were preparing for this conversation and how mythology has been a key aspect of this journey of ancestral embodiment for you. So I would love to hear more about what ancestral embodiment means to you and some of your key learnings from this journey, this intersection of ancestry, mythology, and the body.
Yeah, great question, Tara. And, you know, I suppose like I first came across the term ancestral embodiment when I was asked to speak at a conference about it, you know, and like, so it really is this emerging field. And we know, for example, now through the likes of epigenetics, you know, that we can inherit so much from our ancestors, even trauma, and that can change the makeup of our own bodies. But just to give you kind of an example to make it really personal around my own journey, around an example of ancestral embodiment. So last year, I started having these dreams. And I should preface this by saying that I'm an incredibly vivid dreamer. You know, I have, you know, I've had night terrors since I was a child that are much easier now, but I lucid dream. And, you know, so I really rely a lot on my dreamscape, you know, for information. But I had these dreams of an ancestor coming to me who turns out to be my great grandmother, and her name was Nan Brophy, and she was a band fassa, a wise, curing woman. And in these dreams, she would only speak Oscailga. She would only speak in Irish to me. And I would try to answer, you know, in English to her, and she was just having none of it, you know. And I felt like I was back in the Gaeltacht as a teenager where you were sent home. And this is kind of like an Irish school you went to, and you were sent home if you were speaking English, you know. Look, I always have had a passion for the Irish language. I learned it in school. Of my own free will, I went to the Gaeltacht 3 summers in Donegal as a teenager. I had like a fáinne, a ring for my proficiency in the language, but I lost it over the years because it wasn't alive in my body, you know? And so when these dreams started happening, it kind of spun me into a deep grief that took me, by surprise. And it was so intense that I felt like this grief isn't just mine. It felt bigger than me. And so I started to research, well, what's this relationship between our language, our indigenous tongue, and our bodies? I studied some linguistic anthropology, but that was more looking at language loss from a cultural frame. But what happens in the body, when the language of our ancestors is lost? And like, even if you look in the Irish context, over the years, I've heard people say things like, oh, well, if we all spoke Irish, we'd still be per. And to me, that is just so potent. It's so poignant because that to me is inherited trauma. That's the reality where, English became the language of power on this land. English was the language of the landlord, of the police, of the court system, of the trade, of the education system. And so people saw it as a way out of poverty. And then this gets compounded by famine and huge loss of the language through emigration, like your own ancestors, going to America and having to adapt, and the language gets lost there again. So for me, I've been on this kind of embodiment journey that I call Moshanga agus Mokork, which means, my native tongue and my body. And since then, I've been taking Irish classes each week. I have an incredible teacher, Patricia McGowan. And I finally learned to release the shame around not having fluency in the language. And like, my language can be extraordinarily broken. At times, but like, I just now feel like that releasing, when you release shame, it becomes power to just show up and to say, okay, I'm dedicated now to reconnecting with my Indigenous tongue. And this may take a lifetime, but that's okay. But when you bring this back to the mythology, the mythology is in Gaeilge. It's in Shan Gaeilge. It's in Old Irish. And Irish is one of the oldest languages in Europe, one of the oldest living languages. It's about a millennium older than English. So what I've started to do now is to weave it into my work. So even simple ways like invocations in Gaeilge and English, because many of the women I've worked with have never even heard Gaeilge and they have Irish ancestry. So like, for me, it's really about this sacred sound vibration. You don't even have to speak the language, but just to be in the energy of it. So what does it feel like to receive Gaeilge in your body? So if I say, for example, in English, I am the dreamer of my own dreams. What does that feel like to receive that in your body? And if I say that, in Gaeilge, is Misha Ashlingach, Mahashlinga Hain. What does that feel like to receive in your body? And particularly if you have Irish heritage, because that's the voice of your ancestors. And for me, even when I speak it, I can actually feel like it feels like blood running into my heart space. It's the most extraordinary feeling. And I can't really articulate it. It's quite nebulous. But yeah, so for me, it's kind of it's really a big catalyst around ancestral embodiment has been the Indigenous language, the language of the mythology, and just being in the resonance of it.
Such a beautiful share. And when you spoke about the blood rushing to your heart, when you speak Gaeilge, I felt exactly the same. When you said, I want you to feel this in your body, I just felt my heart just open. And I remember, like you said, there's so many Irish Americans who've never even heard Gaeilge. And when I was in Ireland, I remember going to a mass for St. Bridget that was all in Irish Gaeilge. And I was just sat there, partly stunned, partly in awe, partly just completely blown away. Because I'd heard like little pieces of Gaeilge, but not an entire mass. And there was a part where we went outside and I could literally feel nature reverberating with the language. I could almost see it And it was just so incredibly powerful. And so some of you here might know that I've been learning Shano singing with Mary McLaughlin, my mentor, one of my mentors. And that for me has been such an amazing way to invite one of the languages of my ancestors into my body. And the feeling that I get when I sing is just really beyond words. I don't even know how to describe it. And it's really interesting when I visit with my grandparents who live in Massachusetts. My grandmother is of Irish and English heritage, and my grandfather is Italian heritage. And whenever I sing for them, when I sing in Irish Gaeilge, they start to cry. Even my grandfather, who's he's a very tough man, but a softie inside. And I remember the first time I sang for them, my grandfather said, "It's really amazing that you're doing this because our ancestors wanted to be American. They wanted to assimilate. So the language was broken. And so amazing to see the cycle where the language is wanting to come back." And one of my cousins, he's learning Italian. That's sort of the other side of my ancestry. And that's been a really amazing journey for him. So I just in full resonance with the power of language and the way that the language feels. And there's so many times in English where I feel like the words are insufficient. And I've heard also that English was largely developed as a language by merchants and by warriors. So war and trade. And I feel that energy in my body. And so when I hear Gaeilge, I'm learning Gaeilge, but very slowly. I find language very hard. I find the Shano singing a little easier. I feel that opening in my heart so much. So thank you, Jen, for your beautiful reflections on that. And we have just a few minutes left. And Jen, I know that you have so much magic inside of you, and I'm wondering if you would like to lead us in a short embodiment practice to perhaps connect with the mythos of our own bodies, or whatever you feel alive to share with us in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just inviting everyone to connect with your breath, your life force as you inhale and exhale. And there's no need to change your breath in any way. There's no need to do anything different. Just beginning to bring curiosity to your senses, just noticing. And as you do, just taking a moment as well to feel into all of the points where your body rests into your chair. Breathing down into your seat, just feeling it rise up to greet you, to hold you. The seat itself supported by Mother Earth, by the Cailleach. And in Celtic mythology, there are many stories of the triple goddess. And this goddess exists inside of you. She is your mind. She is your heart space. She is your pelvic bowl. So now, with your eyes still closed, just traveling up now to the goddess of the mind and just noticing the texture of your thoughts. Where are they? Perhaps they're swirling around as a result of our conversation today. So just calling those thoughts home now and inviting them to flow down into your heart, to your goddess of the heart space, and just opening this beautiful heart of yours from the front, from the back, from the sides, to feel, to sense what's here for you in this moment. And perhaps you might like to sound out and just sigh to allow your heart to open a little bit further, just taking all of the vocal land you need here. Wow. And just inviting your breath now a little bit deeper into your pelvic bowl, allowing it to flow down into your left hip, And then down into your right hip. Just opening up that goddess of the womb space, that bowl, that cauldron of creativity in the center of your hips, your sacred place. And as you rest into your Celtic goddess power today, I invite you now to drop the story of the Selkie into your body and just allowing her story to course through the veins of your own life stories. Just noticing with curiosity what bubbles up. And as you do, asking yourself now, body, what am I ready to reclaim? And there's no need to go searching for an answer, no right or wrong here. Just allowing your inner Banfasa, your wise woman, to reveal to you. And after our conversation ends today, you might like to take some time to journey with your body's response, through a movement practice or journaling or whatever feels really nourishing for you and your body. Just leaning into that Selkie energy and exploring what you are ready to reclaim. And then whenever it feels good and true for you, just gently blinking open your eyes and bringing yourself back to the day, back to our conversation.
Thank you for that beautiful journey. I feel like I was away with you for more than 5-7 minutes, whatever that was. Thank you so much for that really deep transmission. And I really hope that everyone listening has had a beautiful experience with us today. And Jen, this feels like a great moment for you to share a little bit about where people can find you, any projects you're working on, or things that you would like people to know about, and just any other information that you would like to offer.
Super. Thank you, Tara. So yeah, you can just find me at celticembodiment.com or on Instagram at Celtic Embodiment. And yeah, I suppose, you can sign up for my mythical newsletter or something that I've just launched this week is a new program called Mythic Body. And this is where I fuse one-to-one intensive Celtic embodiment coaching with a guided study journey over 9 weeks. And, the purpose of this is really to help you remember who you are by knowing your mythical ancestors, knowing your body, and knowing your calling, who you are called to be in this world. So all of that is available on my website, which you're so welcome to visit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. That offering sounds so beautiful. And just thank you for your presence. And I want to thank our ancestors as well, who we called in at the beginning. And I invite us just to close our space for today, giving thanks to all the wisdom that's been shared around the fire and feeling the blessing of our ancestors around us and the beautiful guides that Jen called in at the beginning. Jen, I believe you called in Bridget, Maeve, and Kayak and the Selkies. So I want to offer my thanks to those beautiful guides, to the lands of Ireland for this beautiful connection that's been offered through the mythology. And just taking a few final deep breaths here, thanking your body in this moment for this experience, and just really noticing any shifts that have happened in your body during the past hour that we spent together. Thank you, everyone. Mila buíochas. Sending lots of love to you all, and really excited to share this far and wide with everyone. It's such a gorgeous conversation, and thank you so much, Jen. You've been listening to Dreaming the Ancestors with Tara Brading. My passion is connecting women to the wisdom of their ancestors, specializing in ancestral feminine wisdom from Ireland and England. If you feel called to connect with your Irish ancestry in an embodied, spiritual, feminine way, I lovingly invite you to sign up for my free reclamation journey, which includes a 90-minute video to connect with your Irish ancestry and ancient heritage. And if you hear the call to connect with your English ancestry, I have a 3-hour introductory workshop called Women of the Wells. You can find these offerings at tara-wild.com/get started. To spell that out, that's TARA-WILD.com/get started.